It's Hater Sensei Grandmaster Chosen One Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. We had a bunch of questions fairly recently about Pedro Sauer versus Lance Bechellor. This is a fight that happened way back when over in the state of Utah in the United States of America between a professional bodybuilder, a large man who outweighed Pedro Sauer, a jiu-jitsu black belt at the time. Now he's a corral belt. That's the red and black stripy one you get when you're way advanced as far as degrees in jiu-jitsu. And 100-pound size difference, weight difference there. And this was a very important fight as far as the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu went, because it convinced a lot of people that technique can overcome a size and strength difference. And you probably heard me say many, many times on this channel that size and strength matter in a fight. Yeah, they do. They do. If you watched my podcast I did with Olympic weightlifting coach Zach Tellender, then you should be familiar with this concept. If not, go watch it right now, because there's some really, really important stuff, not just about strength training, but about performance in general. One thing Zach brought up was something he calls the triad of performance.
Triad of performance!
Which comes down to the three things necessary to succeed at a sport. And this is true in weightlifting, this is true in jiu-jitsu, this is true in MMA, this is true in baseball, football, whatever your sport is, it's true. And that is physiology, specificity, and psychology. So if you're not familiar with what that means, physiology, that's your size, that's your strength, that's your athleticism, that's your flexibility, that's all those athletic attributes that are super helpful in a fight. They help you move and lift, and yeah, you get the gist, right? Specificity, that's your training, that's your technique, that's what you know, that's how good you are, that's how you have adapted your physiology to fighting. And then third is the psychology, right? Your effective aggressiveness, your grit, your determination, etc., right? I generally break it down into three things that win fights, and I generally label them as athleticism, aggression, and technique. And it's basically the same thing, the same triad of performance.
And performance!
When we are deficient in one of those areas, and our opponent is proficient in all three of those areas, or more of those areas than we are, they tend to win, and we tend to lose. So when we look at Mr. Utah, Lance Bechellor back then, who really didn't know anything about fighting, but he certainly was a prime physical specimen, a very big, heavy, strong bodybuilder with muscles to spare. But he didn't know jiu-jitsu, didn't know how to box, didn't really know how to fight. And he got into a fight with not just a jiu-jitsu black belt, but one of the jiu-jitsu black belts, Pedro Sauer, man. If you don't know who Pedro was, Pedro Sauer was super influential in the development of Brazilian jiu-jitsu in many parts of the world, including the state of Utah. When I lived there, I lived in Utah for a while. I went to college there. I worked there for a while after graduating from university. My first experience going to an actual Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym was at Pedro Sauer's gym in Utah. And that was that moment where I got trounced by all these guys who knew jiu-jitsu, super nice guys, but you know, I got trounced because I didn't know anything about jiu-jitsu. And humbled and all that great stuff that everybody goes through when they go to a BJJ class for the first time and they don't know BJJ. And yeah, it let me know the standard is very, very high for grappling. And it let me know that martial arts is an ever-evolving concept. And if you're living in the past, you're going to be left behind. And many, many fighters under Pedro's tutelage went on to do significant things. And yeah, man, let's take a look at some clips of this video. You might notice right away the referee is the late, great, the legend, Lonnie Foster. Man, it was a big deal when Lonnie passed away. Man, the MMA community in Utah mourned the loss of this great man. He actually refereed my first MMA fight. And I remember after I won my first MMA fight, he walked up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and backstage, not during the fight, but backstage, he said, "Good job, man." And he smiled. And I know referees are supposed to be very impartial, but that meant a lot to me. Like, especially at that time, like I felt like I don't belong here. I don't belong in cage fighting. And this great man that I had so much respect for showed a great deal of respect to me. Anyway, lots of love to the legend, the late great Lonnie Foster, who refereed this fight. If you watch it on YouTube, you can hear Lonnie's commentary, which is awesome. It's priceless. So, yeah, Pedro Sauer, he wasn't just a jiu-jitsu guy. As we think of jiu-jitsu today, when we think of jiu-jitsu today, we're often thinking of sport jiu-jitsu, where all you do is roll, all you do is grapple. I mean, Pedro understood striking. I mean, you watch this, he starts out, he's creating distance with side kicks to the leg, which a lot of people seem to think that fighters like John Jones invented. Nah, man. that was basic fundamental teaching in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu back in the day, because Jiu-Jitsu was taught as a martial art for practical self-defense. And if you don't understand applications of striking, you don't really understand self-defense. And you see Pedro Sauer doing things like setting up his punches, setting up a beautiful check hook when this large man comes charging in. And when Lance finally charges in, bull rushes in, Pedro pulls guard, manages to sweep him, and finally finishes with an armbar. And from an outside perspective, you might think, oh, the little man beat the big man. It's David versus Goliath. And okay, sure. In many ways, it is. If you go back to the David and Goliath fight from the Bible, what was that? We had a big, strong man with armor and a sword and a shield and a spear, melee weapons, against a small shepherd boy who happened to be an expert slinger who came to that fight with a projectile weapon. A projectile weapon. And some experts theorize that the stopping power of an expert slinger with the type of stones available in that area had the stopping power of a .45 Magnum round. So essentially, David brought a gun to a knife fight. And that's basically what happened with Pedro Sauer. You have a guy who not only knows how to fight, but he is an expert. One of the preeminent experts in this part of the world at the time in the art of fighting, in the art of physical hand-to-hand combat, against a guy who has one of the sides of the triad of performance, physiology. And not even physiology adapted to fighting specifically. Physiology adapted to hypertrophy, growing your muscles big. And that's not the same as physiology for fighting. You can see, well, maybe you can't see that he lacked muscular endurance because the fight didn't last that long. It was just a couple of minutes, and then it was over. So he didn't really even have a chance to get tired. So we don't know what kind of stamina Mr. Utah had. But we do see that Pedro Sauer outperformed him in terms of specificity and in terms of psychology. One of those men had been in fights before. One of those men had been in fights against other trained martial artists before, many, many times. And one of them was big and aggressive, but that's it. Now, if we had a guy with the physiology of Mr. Utah and the psychology of an actual fighter and the specificity of an actual fighter, it would be a way different story. And we've seen this time and time again. For example, recently, we had Hafthor Bjornsson, world's strongest man, rolling against, oh man, I'm blanking on the dude's name, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt from Australia. It's bugging me, I can't remember his name.
Josh
I think
Palmer. Ramsey, his name was Josh Palmer. Come on, man, get it together.
What's the show? Cage Wars? I don't remember. Correct me in the comments down below. If you know this fellow's name, I'm going to look it up after I record this.
Josh Palmer. It's Josh Palmer.
But we see a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt doing everything right. He's doing everything right. But it doesn't matter because Thor Bjornsson is just too big. Now in the case of Pedro Sauer versus Lance Bechellor, Pedro Sauer, I think he was like 150 pounds at the time, and Lance Bechellor was like 250 pounds. That's a significant difference, but it's a doable difference. I've sparred with guys with that much size and strength difference. I've sparred with big bodybuilder type of guys, and it's not easy. It is not easy. Pedro made it look easy. It's not easy. Your technique has to be good. Your technique has to be on point. What Pedro did there is very difficult, even against an untrained guy. Of that size and that strength, it's quite difficult. It's a very impressive feat even to this day. So, not taking anything away from Lance Bechellor. You know, he was not a trained fighter at the time, but beating a guy like that who is aggressive, who's trying to squash you, who's trying to hurt you, even if he doesn't know how to fight, it's dangerous and it's very difficult. And if you don't know how to fight, if you're not good, if you're not well-rounded in the triad of performance, if you will, you're probably going to get squashed. You're going to get hurt. But Hafthor Bjornsson, this is a different deal. This dude is much, much bigger. So we're looking at a black belt who is about 3, maybe 4 times smaller than his opponent.
Come on, Ramsey, I looked it up. He's only 2.5 times smaller.
I mean, it's basically the same size difference as my 8-year-old daughter fighting me. And I've been training my 8-year-old daughter since she was a baby. She knows what an armbar is. She knows what a rear naked choke is. And if we rolled, even if I didn't know anything about jiu-jitsu, if I wasn't being nice, she would lose every single time. And again, we see the jiu-jitsu black belt. He's doing everything right. He has some beautiful movement, his hip movement on the bottom, trying to set up an arm bar from an arm triangle, and it doesn't matter because Thor is just too big. So there is a point. There does come a point where size and strength can become insurmountable. When there's, say, a 30% difference in size and strength, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu works really, really well. If there is a significantly larger size and strength difference, oh man, it gets exponentially more difficult. I mean, think about trying to fight a grizzly bear, for example, or a silverback gorilla. Humans don't win those fights, and grizzly bears and silverback gorillas don't know anything about martial arts. But if you try to engage in hand-to-hand combat with a wild animal like that, you will lose every time, without exception. 100% of the time, those animals win. 100% of the time. They will kill you, or at the very least, they will maim you enough so that you remember that conflict if they choose to let you survive. So size and strength, they certainly do matter. And I think when I make videos saying this, people tend to assume the opposite, that technique doesn't matter. No, guys, of course it does. Your specificity matters a great deal. Why do you think I go to the gym every day, multiple times a day to train, to improve my technique? Because it's important. For the same reason I go to the gym every day to work on my athleticism, to work on my flexibility, to work on my muscle endurance, to get stronger. Why do I lift weights? Why do I do squats and deadlifts and pull-ups? Because that matters too. Why do I spend so much time talking to you on this channel about martial arts on a cerebral level? Because that matters too. All of these 3 things matter. The physiology, the specificity, the psychology, your technique, your aggression, and of course, your athleticism. Those all matter. And if you're deficient in one, fix that. So, thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.
And now, a word from our sponsor. NoGiBJJGear.com is now xmartial.com, serving your needs beyond just no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, find brand new equipment for mixed martial arts, kickboxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, and more at xmartial.com. As always, use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off everything on the website. Once again, that's xmartial.com.
And also shout out to Relx Bit, makers of fine, high-powered massage guns. Link in the description below as well. Oh yeah, I got a discount code for that one too. Not gonna leave you hanging dry there.